Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Pewaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Today, we'll hear from the candidates seeking election to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, Judge Maria Lazar and Judge Chris Taylor.
What I'm trying to do is restore faith in the courts, restore the belief that there is integrity, impartiality, and independence, as well as judicial restraint.
I love people, I love the law, and I am passionate about justice. Those three principles have led me and guided me my entire life.
We'll also learn about the increasing demand for whey, a byproduct of cheesemaking.
Basically, it became one of the most nutritious sources of protein on the market, and so the value just skyrocketed once that was discovered, and new ways are being found constantly for how to use it.
All that's coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Thanks for joining us today. Next week, voters will elect a new justice to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Justice Rebecca Bradley is not running for re-election. The candidates seeking to take the open seat are Maria Lazar and Chris Taylor, both judges on the Wisconsin Court of Appeals. Justices rule on cases of statewide importance. While the state Supreme Court is technically nonpartisan, it has become increasingly used to decide on important issues like abortion, redistricting, voting rights, and more. Today, we'll hear from both of the candidates, and we'll start with Maria Lazar, who is backed by 30 county sheriffs and some conservative lawmakers. Here's Lazar speaking with Lake Effect Sam Woods and Joy Powers. This conversation has been edited for time and clarity.
What do you think is at stake in this election?
Well, when I look at this election, I don't want to be overly dramatic, but I really think that part of the heart and soul of our state courts is at stake in this election. I think that we need to, everyone in my home state of Wisconsin needs to take a step back and really look at our courts. And what I'm trying to do is restore faith in the courts, restore the belief that there is integrity, impartiality, and independence, as well as judicial restraint.
When you announced your campaign, you said that you wanted to stop the destruction of our courts, and specifically the state Supreme Court. What do you view as destroying the court?
Well, part of what I had said before is the fact that I think in our last few elections for the state Supreme Court in particular, sometimes maybe the Court of Appeals, but the state Supreme Court, I believe that our judicial races have turned into nasty partisan political campaigns where the candidates and their supporting groups have focused more on the political partisanship and agendas and mandates instead of focusing in on the judicial experience, the legal experience, and the integrity and impartiality of the candidates. I think that we risk a great damage to our state Supreme Court and our other courts. It could be across the country as well. We risk this damage that the public is going to lose respect, lose faith, and that's the key thing. You have to have individuals in our state able to believe that if they walk into a courtroom, any courtroom at any level, but in particular a state Supreme Court, that they will have the ability to have their case be heard fully and fairly, and they will have an opportunity to express their points of view, not their points of view, their arguments, and that they will be heard. I don't know that that's what the majority of the people in our state believe of this court right now.
Now, you have previously described the court as being 3-4, so 3 conservatives, I would guess, and 4 liberal justices. That suggests that you view the court in some ways through what I would call a partisan lens. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't know that I would say that it's partisan. I would say that the composition of our current court has 4 justices who are the majority, and then the 3 that are in the minority. The minority, I would say, is more independent, slightly more conservative. The other side is slightly more liberal. But I think it's also a degree of how the court and the justices view their roles and what they do. I think the 4 on the majority see their position on this court as more of an opportunity to present a mandate or follow an agenda. And I think that the 3 on the other side are more strictly originalist, constructionists, and looking at the law as it is. So I don't know that it's really a partisan split. I think it's an activism split, to be more exact.
I want to follow up on something that you mentioned, that you see some justices looking to present a mandate or advance an agenda. Are there particular cases or rulings that you have in mind when you say that?
Well, there are some, but more to the point, when I first started my campaign, which started on October 1, I believe early on I went on a television program and upfront, and I talked about why I was running, what I was looking to do, and that I thought this court wasn't as – I was asked if it was dysfunctional. I said it wasn't collegial. The following week, the Chief Justice, Jill Karofsky, went on the same program and took my words, well, disagreed with what I said, but also I think said part of the quiet part out loud. She indicated that she felt this, based on the last few elections, that the Supreme Court, as it's currently composed, has a mandate to act in a certain fashion and to not, in her words, not carry the water for right-wing special interest groups. And that was a very concerning statement to me because as a judge, as hopefully a justice, we don't have mandates, we don't have agendas, we don't have partisan views that we want to express. We are literally blindfolded Lady Justice. We are only to look at what the law is, not what we want it to be. And I think that that's a concern if you have a court that believes that it has an ability to step outside its lane, its zone of the 3 branches of government. And that was one of my main concerns.
How do you think we got here with the court?
You know, that's a difficult question. I think when I look back and I look at who used to be on the state Supreme Court, and when I was a younger lawyer, I would always look at the members on the state Supreme Court, the justices, sort of with a sense of awe. And these were the really big, deep scholars. These were the people who really knew the law and cared about the law and were there because they'd lived their entire lives and their practices and earned that spot. I think now people are looking at the court, and some political sides and points of view and parties are looking at it as a way to forward their agenda by pushing justices who they believe will rule in a certain fashion. And I always say it's kind of remarkable that you can ever prejudge a case if you're honest and if you're a true jurist, because you don't know the facts and you don't know the law until you read those briefs and you hear the argument. And there's so many times when I was on the circuit court, there are times on the Court of Appeals now as well, where I would walk in after having read everything and looked at everything and been set, and someone throws a new fact at you or they throw a new case at you, and you have to take a step back and say, you know, I have to think about this again, and I can't give you an opinion. I'm concerned that groups and entities are looking at the courts as a way to get what they want without having to go through the legislature or the executive.
What would you say is your approach to judicial interpretation?
So there are several varieties of how you can describe a judicial philosophy. Mine is originalism with a touch of textualism, and I will explain. So I believe that we should be looking as originalists. I sort of followed U.S. Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch, follow the position that you look at the law, you look at the statute, you look at the words, the amendment, or whatever it is, and if you can find a way to determine what the law says. By doing that, that's where you stop. Usually that's not the case, because if it were that simple, you wouldn't have two parties bringing it to court. So it's often that you have to try to interpret something that is slightly more ambiguous. And so as an originalist, then what you do is you go up and down, and I'll explain that. You go up and look at the heading, you go down and look at other statutes, you go to the sides and look and see if there's a definition somewhere else. You stay within that context. And if you still can't find that, that's when I get a little bit to the textualism, where you start looking a little bit more at, let's say, dictionaries, grammar books, courses of conduct, something else. So my philosophy is to follow that course and that procedure. The opposite philosophy is someone who will look at the case, the issue, the question, and they will look at what answer they want, and then they will find a way to get there, sort of a Machiavellian, the ends justifying the means. So we're going to get to this answer, and we're going to do it by going through these machinations and get there. I don't think that that's a way judges should ever approach the law. That, to me, is activism, and it's activism whether it gets you an answer that you personally like or that you want some group to have. You can't do that because the next day the justice or judge is going to do something that's going to take away a right you have. So you have to really stay within those parameters, and that's how I've always practiced. That's how I've always operated as a judge.
Is there a decision or justice, again asking for specifics here, is there a decision or justice that you would describe as activist?
Well, in this case, in this campaign, my opponent is someone who has indicated that she is going to act as a judicial activist. She has indicated on her website that her judicial philosophy is people-based, which, quite frankly, if you were a lawyer, there is no such thing. And what it tells me and what it tells everyone who looks at it is that she is going to be ruling not based upon the law, not based upon what the legislature wrote, but she's going to be ruling based on the people who are in front of her. And that is not how you operate as a judge. That's how you operate as a politician.
So there are some big issues that voters are naturally interested in your position on. I think when people go to the ballot box, they want to know what they're getting. That includes issues like abortion, labor rights, and voting rights, to name just a few. What would you tell voters about your stance on these issues?
Well, first I would say, if I can say, that they should go to judgemarialazar.com, and that I have written and published positions and statements on, the first one was on redistricting, the next few were on abortion and reproductive rights, and then the last one was on religious freedoms, and I'm working on the next two, which I'm not going to tell you what they are, but they're going to come up. So if you have questions on those, and I have repeatedly repeated my stance on those issues, I recognize that voters have told candidates through the Marquette University Law Poll that I think it's 85% have said they want to know what their judicial candidates stand for or stand up for. And ethically, we're allowed to say that. We're not allowed to say on case Jones versus Smith, this is how I'd rule, because that's a violation of your ethics. But we are allowed to say, as I have, what the principles are in redistricting, what the principles are in the First Amendment, freedom of religious freedom issues, and issues on abortion. With respect to abortion, I've repeatedly said it, and I can repeat it very quickly if you want.
Sure.
So, first of all, we all have to really take a step back, because abortion is such a hot-button issue that people always forget that it's the woman who's involved in this situation. And usually it's not, well, it most likely is often not the best or easiest decision they're going to make in their lives. And it's something that's complicated, and it doesn't help when you have people screaming at you from all sides. So we have to respect the woman first. The other things I've written about and talked about are that there is clarity for our state of Wisconsin. The state Supreme Court last year in Ermansky versus Call, or the other way around, issued an opinion where they determined that the law as it stands today in the state of Wisconsin is that it's a 20-week compromise, about halfway through the pregnancy, and that is the line that's drawn, and abortions are allowed up to there. And then after that, then it is restrictions, it's concerns for the life of the mother, the child, or there are other issues that happen after that 20 weeks, and then it's really the mother and the doctor who are dealing with those. So there's that line that's been drawn, and I've told people that I follow precedent. I will respect that law, and that is the law of the state of Wisconsin. So I really don't know what more people need to hear about that, and my concern is that my opponent has repeatedly complained about my position and has refused steadfastly to say what her own is. My position is out there in writing, in black and white, 3-4 times, saying that I will respect that position. I don't know what hers is.
Last question. You came into this interview and opened your campaign with wanting to restore impartiality and restraint to the court. And, that can certainly, I could see myself as a justice on the Supreme Court saying like, oh, that's me, isn't it? And so if you are elected and now you're walking in with 6 justices that you started your campaign implying that, there's not impartiality, restraint, et cetera here, how do you see yourself fitting on that court?
I have always been someone who is able to work with anyone. I am the more collegial member on the courts that I've been on. When I was in the circuit court, I was the judge who would set up for every division or rotation that I was in. We would do meetings, lunches, get-togethers. I do that on the Court of Appeals. I do not see that, and I do know the justices on the state Supreme Court right now, and I do not see that after all the dust blows away in the campaign, I do not see this being a detriment to my ability to work well, to work collegially, to try to soften edges on matters, to express perhaps a diverse point of view that will bring other justices together. I honestly believe that when we are together as judges on the Court of Appeals now, and we're in our conferences and we're disputing how we're going to go one way or another on a case or an appeal, I see the same thing being possible on the state Supreme Court. I don't think that there are going to be any strongly held, long, hard feelings in this campaign, because I intend to, should I be fortunate to have the people of the state of Wisconsin vote for me, I intend to be a justice that will always work well, be collegial, express my point of view, and constantly be respectful. If there's a dissent, and if you have to dissent on something, or even concur, which means you disagree with what the majority wrote, there's no reason whatsoever that you should bring personality into it. You should be respectful. You can be polite. On the U.S. Supreme Court, Justice Scalia and Justice Ginsburg, I think we're on opposite ends a lot. But after their work was done, they would get together and they'd go out to the opera, which I don't understand. But they would do that, and they would be friendly and personable. And I think that's something that I would bring to this court as well. I would bring that sense of collegiality. Let's get together and have a lunch where we don't talk about any cases. And let's, when we're talking, always be respectful. And as a younger justice coming in, as a newer justice coming in, I think that's where your role is anyway. I think you need to listen, learn, and bring your experience, but also pay attention to the level of experience that's already there. And I don't see myself as being disruptive, and I don't see myself, if I were on this court, being someone who would do anything other than do my job, devote myself to the courts, to the Constitution, and always, always be a respectful, collegial member of that court.
All right. Well, Judge Lazar, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That was Judge Maria Lazar. She's running for a seat on the state Supreme Court. You can hear more of her conversation with Lake Effect's Joy Powers and Sam Woods at WUWM.com. We'll hear from Lazar's opponent, Judge Chris Taylor, after a short break. And later in the show, we'll learn about whey production in Wisconsin and why we're seeing such a high demand for it. That conversation is in about 20 minutes, so keep listening to Lake Effect on WUWM. You're listening to Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. We just heard from Judge Maria Lazar, one of the candidates seeking a seat on the state Supreme Court. The other candidate is Judge Chris Taylor. Taylor has more than 160 judicial endorsements, including from liberal-leaning state Supreme Court Justices Rebecca Dallett, Janet Protasewicz, Jill Karofsky, and Susan Crawford. Taylor served as a Democratic state legislator for nearly a decade. She's been on the Wisconsin Court of Appeals since 2023 and is now seeking election to the state Supreme Court. Here's her conversation with Lake Effect Sam Woods and Joy Powers. This conversation has been edited for time and clarity.
What do you think is at stake in this election?
Well, there's a lot at stake in this April 7th election for our state Supreme Court. We are seeing an erosion on our rights and freedoms. We are seeing challenges to our elections and our right to vote. And it is so important we have a strong court to stand up for the people of Wisconsin, to stand up for our democracy and our elections, and to stand up for the independence of our state against the overreach of the federal government. So it is incredibly important that we have a strong court that is committed to the people of Wisconsin, is committed to defending their rights and freedoms, making sure that eligible voters are able to vote, and making sure that the results of our elections are protected.
Sure. Now, looking at yourself really as a candidate, you do have less direct experience on Wisconsin courts than your opponent, about 6 years to your opponent's 11. How do you respond to voters who might see you as being less qualified?
Well, I have had an incredibly strong, diverse legal career that make me actually very uniquely qualified and quite different than my opponent and anybody else on the court. I have seen the law from so many different angles, both as an attorney in private practice, where I started representing just ordinary Wisconsinites. I was then the attorney and law and policy director for Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin, where I worked to protect access to reproductive health care and make sure that patients can make their own private health care decisions. I served almost 9 years in the state legislature, and I've now served on 2 different levels of courts, both the trial court and the Court of Appeals. So I would say I'm incredibly well qualified for this position. Just because you have a certain number of years does not mean you have good judgment. My opponent has been repeatedly reversed because her decisions do not adequately and accurately apply the law. In contrast, I have never been reversed as a judge because I am scrupulous in applying the law, in reaching the correct resolution, and in making sure everyone before me is fairly heard, has the opportunity to present their case, and has the opportunity to get justice from a fair and impartial judge, which is what I am, which is what my track record shows.
So we'll return to some of your previous experience here in a bit, but first I want to get into your judicial philosophy. So to start, how would you describe your approach to judicial interpretation?
So I approach every case with the same 3 principles. First, every person deserves equal justice under the law. And that there's 2 components there. The first is that laws must be applied fairly and consistently. And secondly, there has to be a fair process that everybody should have the opportunity to be heard and have their positions considered. I would say the second principle is that the rule of law applies to everybody. There's no entity or individual who is above the law. There is no person that is above the law because of their privilege or their power. So that is the second principle that I think is so incredibly important that we need. And then thirdly is just the independence of the judiciary. My decisions cannot be dependent on any branch of government, any group, any political party. We have to have judges who are independent. And I will say, to the extent that judges bring politics to the bench, my opponent has shown that she does do that. She sides for the right-wing special interests consistently, and she's been reversed as a result of it. And I think my background is in stark contrast to that. That is why I've been endorsed by over 150 judges throughout our state. And I've also been endorsed by the majority of Court of Appeals judges whom we both serve with. And that is because they know how hard I work. They know how seriously I take the role as a judge, and they know how committed I am to applying the rule of law consistently, fairly, and independently.
In previous interviews, you've described your judicial philosophy as centered on people. Can you describe what that means in practice?
Well, the law is about people. I mean, that's, the law is a great unifier. It unifies individuals throughout our nation because it sets a common set of principles and a common set of rules that we all have to abide by. So, and ultimately, what I never forget is there are real people impacted by the decisions that I make. And I think judges should never forget that people are counting on us to solve really complicated legal problems that have profound effects on their lives. And so we should never forget that there is a person, a family, a whole community at the other end of the decisions that we issue. And judges also, I will say, have to be independent. That does not mean that we're isolated. We are part of the communities that elect us. We are a piece of our communities, and it's very important that we not be isolated from our communities.
So when we interviewed your opponent and asked very similar questions about judicial philosophy, she would describe, your opponent described her philosophy as in terms of, like in legal terms, like originalism, textualism, et cetera. And her claim was that this is kind of a understanding that I'll apply to every case, or that she kind of leads with every case, and contrasted that with your approach, and tried to make the case that your approach allows you to find a rationale for the result that you want. Do you have a response to that?
The only person who has brought politics to the bench is my opponent. She has sided with every right-wing position on the Court of Appeals. She has issued an opinion that was recently overturned that would have allowed disclosure of private voting information to individuals who led the charge in trying to overturn our 2020 election. That case was overturned by the state Supreme Court. She joined another case allowing polluters to dump toxic forever chemicals into our water and not hold them accountable. That case was overturned by the state Supreme Court. She wrote another opinion justifying some of the lame duck laws that we saw that delegated the powers of the executive to the legislative branch. That was overturned by 7-0. I have a record of writing really strong, good decisions. I have never been overturned. I had thousands of cases at the trial court level. I've written dozens and dozens of cases at the appellate level. I have support of over 150 judges throughout the state of Wisconsin, including the majority of my colleagues who are also colleagues of my opponent. There is a reason they are not supporting my opponent. She brings politics to the bench. She cannot point to a decision I have written where you see that. And that's because I understand the importance of an independent judiciary. I understand the importance of the judiciary being a protector of people's rights and freedoms. I'll give you an example. My opponent defended, when she was an attorney representing Governor Scott Walker, what some election experts called the most gerrymandered legislative maps in the last 40 years. My opponent defended those maps. The state Supreme Court in 2023 found that very similar maps to the maps that my opponent defended were unconstitutional because they did not abide by our state constitution's requirement that the territory within each Assembly and Senate district be contiguous. So that is an example of, first of all, my opponent carrying a very extreme right-wing flag throughout her entire legal career. But it's also an example of our state Supreme Court holding the legislative branch accountable when they acted unconstitutionally. That is what I will do as a judge. Not be a rubber stamp for the out-of-state billionaires that are supporting my opponent's campaign because she has such little support from the people of the state of Wisconsin. Not being a rubber stamp for any political party or branch of the government. I have an independent record and I will stand up for the people of the state of Wisconsin.
Now, you've brought up some of this, but there are a variety of hot-button issues that voters are naturally interested in your position on. That includes issues like redistricting, like abortion, labor rights, voting rights. What would you tell voters about your stance on these issues?
Well, you can't take a position on any particular of a case that might come before you. But what I can talk about is what my values are. And my values have been the same since I was a little girl. I love people, I love the law, and I am passionate about justice. And those three principles have led me and guided me my entire life. So I'm happy to answer if you have a specific issue, but I deeply value people having access to justice, being treated fairly, having their voices heard. I have been all over the state of Wisconsin, and people are so hungry for a government and a judiciary that actually cares about them and stands up for their rights and has their back. So those are the things that motivate me and inspire me every single day as a judge.
Now, I will say we did speak with Judge Lazar before we conducted this interview with you. And one of the things that she talked about when it came to her stances, she really focused more on precedent, following what the law says. You focus on your values. And one of the things that have come up among critics is this idea that sharing your values is really not the role of a judge, that that's something a politician should do. What do you think of this criticism?
Well, we have case law that says judges certainly have the right to talk about their values. That's a First Amendment right. Voters are electing us to a 10-year term to the highest court in our state. They have the right to know about what our values are. And I will say that I think my opponent doesn't want to talk about our values because they're out of step with the values of most people in our state. And in terms of applying precedent, she was overturned for ignoring precedent in the case where she wanted to release private voting information. There was already a case that exactly the same case, the same litigants, the same issue, which said that is protected information. It can't be released. She has directly ignored precedent. You cannot point to anything in my judicial career where I have so blatantly ignored precedent and been reversed because of it.
So this gets to a bit of the kind of elephant in the room when it comes to your candidacy, is that you were a member of the state legislature for 9 years as a Democrat. So are you campaigning expecting voters to separate your record as a Democratic politician from your role as a justice?
Well, anybody who is running for public office, you don't just bring segments of your career with you. I mean, my opponent was an attorney in private practice representing big banks and predatory lenders who are foreclosing on Wisconsinites' homes. She was Scott Walker's attorney, representing the most harmful impacts of some of his agenda. And she has, I would say, a concerning record as a judge. So we all bring our histories, and I have a long, diverse 30-year career where the through line in my career is standing up for people's rights, in making sure that people have access to justice and are treated fairly, and that the judiciary is a place that doesn't prioritize the most wealthy and the most privileged, but where every Wisconsinite can come and be heard and have legal issues resolved in a fair and impartial way. That is what I've done as a judge. But I'm proud of my entire career because I have demonstrated that what I care about is people and people getting justice and people being treated fairly, and the law being a something that is so important in uniting us and in creating commonality between people. And so those are my passions, and those things have motivated me my entire life. I don't have a memory of wanting to be anything else but someone who makes sure that I am using the law in a way that helps people and improves their lives.
So looking at your endorsements, as you've mentioned, you have been endorsed by many different judges. That includes the 4 liberal justices on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. None of the conservative justices or conservative-backed justices have endorsed you. But if elected, how would you see yourself fitting into the current court?
Well, I mean, I would see myself fitting in just as I fit in at the Court of Appeals. I really relish working with all kinds of people. That's what I did in the legislature. I worked with all kinds of legislators from all over the state on all kinds of different issues. I really enjoy the collaboration at the appellate court. Unlike at the circuit court, at the appellate court, we write in panels. So we do have single or one judge decisions that we write, but for the most part, on the complicated, really difficult issues, we're writing together. And there's a really lovely back and forth. We don't always agree, but I like the debate and I like hearing other people's perspectives. I like sharing mine. We all have sometimes different takes on what the law says and how it should be applied. But I think the process, the collaborative process that we use at the appellate court is really a wonderful process. And our decisions are better because we are talking to each other. So that's what I would bring to the state Supreme Court, a real relish for the collaborative process.
That was Judge Chris Taylor. She's running for a seat on the state Supreme Court. You can hear more of her conversation with Lake Effect's Joy Powers and Sam Woods at WUWM.com. There, you'll also find more information about all of the candidates you'll see on the ballot next Tuesday, April 7th, and what you need to know about this election. Also, check out WUWM's podcast, Swing State of the Union, for 2 bonus episodes about how the state Supreme Court operates. You can also listen to Lake Effect on demand. Find it as a podcast wherever you like to listen to download and enjoy on the go. We'll take one more break, and when we come back, we'll learn about whey production in Wisconsin and how its increased demand for the product is impacting local farmers. That's next on Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. If you're buying protein-rich foods or supplements, there's a good chance that protein came from a Wisconsin cheesemaker. Whey is a liquid byproduct of the cheesemaking process and is rich in protein. It is usually processed into the form of powder to be added to smoothies, bars, or other food advertising high-protein content. Wisconsin farmers produce about 1/3 of the nation's whey, and demand has skyrocketed in recent years as people seek more protein in their diet. Drew Dawson is a freelance writer for Milwaukee Magazine who wrote about Wisconsin's whey economy for this month's issue. He joins Lake Effect Sam Woods to discuss why whey is in demand and why some farmers benefit more than others.
I want to start with some basics. So what is whey and what is it used for?
Basically, whey is a byproduct of the cheesemaking process, but it is a big byproduct. And by that, I mean for every 1 pound of cheese you make, you get 9 pounds of whey. So say you have 100 pounds of milk, 10 pounds of that is going to be cheese, 90 pounds of that is going to be whey. And traditionally, that was something that they just threw away. So say in the 80s, 90s, and before that, there was no use for it. Nothing was discovered for it. They just gave it away. There was no disposal of it. It was used as pig feed. But then later, it was found that they had some pretty nutritional value.
In your article, you mentioned that whey was originally popular with bodybuilders and now has a more general audience. So can you describe how this changed?
Yeah, no, it's just something I think that, I did not grow up with, a balanced diet, if you will, but, learn later like, oh, I need to have these things. And protein is one that has become big in recent years for just the everyday consumer. Whereas 10 years ago, yeah, you saw protein powders, you saw things like that at, GNC and, bodybuilders and, athletes, and all of them were using it to build muscle. But then everyone realized kind of, oh, maybe I actually need some protein. I like to wake up now with some protein and be very intentional about it. And you just see it a lot more. So if you see like, hey, 16 grams of protein in this, 20 grams of protein in that, whether it's protein bar or something else, a lot of times that is coming from powdered whey that is created through this process.
And in just the last few years, whey has found another market through the popularization of GLP-1 drugs. Can you explain what GLP-1s are and how they fit into this picture?
So if you've been following the news, yeah, GLP-1s might have been something you come across. That is weight loss drugs that you might have seen more common now, and which are great things. But as part of that, you not only are you losing body fat, you're also losing muscle mass. So a lot of doctors right now are seeing that and saying, oh, you need to add more protein to your diet. One of the easiest ways to do that is whey protein. And that is not the only reason we're seeing more of it now, but it is one of the big players.
Turning to the supply side of this, given that all these different types of people are interested in supplementing their diet with whey, how important is it to a cheesemaker's bottom line these days?
Yeah. So again, kind of jumping back, like that was a byproduct. It was something thrown away by most cheesemakers, if not all cheesemakers. Now, 95% is estimated by the Center for Dairy Research of cheesemakers turn whey into a profit. So no longer is it really considered a profit. It is a huge revenue driver, and that's because you can turn it into this protein. It was discovered that, it had these amino acids, which are, the building blocks for proteins. I won't get into all the science. I am not the science expert. But basically, it became one of the most nutritious sources of protein on the market. And so the value just skyrocketed once that was discovered. And new ways are being found constantly for how to use it. But it's also been concentrated now to, sweet whey was traditionally what you made from the cheesemaking process. It's what, and very simply, in the smallest way, without doing too much, you could turn it into sweet whey, which is about 12% protein. Now companies are able to do it with new technology, 80 to 90%, and there is a lot of value in that. And one example I had in the story was a cheese producer, Cedar Grove. Their separator went down in the fall for, I think, 3 weeks. And in that 3-week period, just based on whey, their overall bottom line lost 10 to 15% of total revenue lost that they were are expected to see. So it's definitely very lucrative and something if they can find that benefit, same way that when they first discovered that whey had this nutritional protein benefits, I assume they'll find a way to try to find that benefit and even more so in the future.
So your article mentions that overall, this rise in demand for a former waste product, whey, benefits Wisconsin farmers. And Wisconsin, as America's dairyland, leads the nation in whey production, accounting for about 30% of the national output. But the price of whey also has an effect on the price of milk. So can you explain that relationship?
Sure. So, we are very, very big producers of whey in the state. Obviously, we do a lot of dairy, so we naturally, if we're making cheese as well, producing a lot of whey. And so when every month the USDA, the federal organization that oversees this, sets the minimum price of milk. So that is the minimum price you have to pay. So a cheesemaker, for example, has to pay to get that milk. But it's paying not just for the milk overall, it's paying for all of its properties. So that is fat, protein, whey solids, lactose, minerals, all of those things it accounts for. And so when whey prices are high, like they are right now, that is factored into the cost of the milk. So a cheesemaker has to pay for all those. So they are paying a high price right now for that milk.
Yeah, it's almost like you're paying for the potential of milk, or like what milk can be than the kind of the milk itself.
Absolutely, yeah. And so when you see that happening, so say a big cheesemaker, someone that can do millions of pounds of cheese a year, they are paying for that milk, but they are getting all the benefits of that whey. So like they're getting the whey and producing it, but they are processing it on site with all the machinery that they can afford, and they can have enough to use those machines. So they can make 80%, 90% protein whey and turn a profit. They get all the profit and all the benefits from that, and that is not necessarily that is more than probably what they're paying for that milk. Whereas the smaller, medium-sized cheesemaker doesn't have the machine, has to ship it out. So there are shipping costs that they have to do to an off-site place, and it's a pretty heavy product.
So are all cheesemakers able to cash in on this rise in demand for whey equally?
No, that's the unfortunate part of this. Whereas, this is a great thing for dairy farmers, and we cannot forget that. It is not equal across the board. So again, when a big cheesemaker is producing everything on site and can, use all its machinery to turn it into 89% whey, and that's kind of the final product that it's able to sell itself, it's getting all the value for that. The smaller ones can't do that, unfortunately. They can do as much as they can, but they then have to ship it out. And the issue there becomes is they're paying that high price for that milk initially, so which, as we said, includes the cost of the whey. So when whey prices are high like they are now, they are paying that full price, but they are not getting that full value back because they don't turn it into a final product. They have to pay more. But that can be a double-edged sword because there are only two options, essentially. They can either turn it for a value of some profit where they are essentially losing some money. They are losing money in that process. Or they can dispose of it, which is even more expensive to dispose of. So, they're caught in a tough spot because they are losing money either way. And this just happens to be the way they lose less.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. So let's recap our road to this moment. So whey protein, often in the form of powder, has seen increasing demand over the last couple of decades as it finds new segments of the population that are interested in it, whether that be fitness enthusiasts, general population looking for more protein, people taking GLP-1s, etc. Wisconsin and Wisconsin's cheesemakers are theoretically well positioned to take advantage of that rise in demand because whey is a byproduct of the cheesemaking process. Used to be just to throw it away. Now they can profit from it. However, bigger farms are able to afford the type of machinery and realize more of the gains from whey. So all of that being said, crash course history there of the last few decades. What does the future hold, particularly for small farmers who are paying that higher price in milk but are not able to, on their own, realize the type of gains that bigger farmers are able to realize for their product? Yeah.
So that's the crystal ball I bet a lot of people would like to see. And there are many takes on what the future holds, but right now they believe that this is not just a short-term trend. Protein is something we all need, and it is definitely, I think, they're going to see continued demand for it. But for the smaller farmers, some things that I heard in reporting this were they still wanted to benefit the dairy farmers. No one's working against each other. But yeah, just an equal, hey, we're hurting a little bit from this. Is there any way to make there an equal formula for everyone that benefits everyone? And that's one way. And then another one is that the Center for Dairy Research mentioned is something that is done in Europe is a couple of smaller cheesemakers, combine their resources and, have a drying facility, if you will, somewhere regionally, and they all contribute to that and feed it, because it is not an easy process to run those machines. It's very capital intensive, and what that means is it needs 1 to 2 million pounds of liquid whey per day to make it financially viable. So that's not something, the small cheesemaker can do when they're producing 3.5 million pounds of cheese per year, which produces 40 million pounds of whey per year. So there is a lot of possibilities and a lot of options, but yeah, it's uncertain where the future is, but it's no matter where the benefit is, even if it's losing a little bit right now, they still see huge value in whey versus 3 decades ago when it was just pig feed. It's now one of the most valuable products in cheesemaking.
Well, Drew, thank you so much for joining me on Lake Effect.
Yeah, Sam, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Drew Dawson is a freelance writer for Milwaukee Magazine, and he joined Lake Effect's Sam Woods. And that wraps up today's show. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. If you've missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at wuwm.com. If you'd like to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Tomorrow on Lake Effect, we'll look at how the community has responded to the use of facial recognition technology by local law enforcement. Plus, we'll follow up with Wisconsin Olympian Deidre Irwin to hear about her experience at the Games. Thank you so much for joining us today, right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.